RuneScape Dragonwilds is about to leave early access, and on September 15th it's coming to PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and Nintendo Switch 2 alongside its full launch. Which means that for the first time a huge number of people are going to be looking at this game and asking themselves, is this actually worth buying? Because Dragonwilds has changed a lot since it first launched. There is now an entire world to explore, 12 skills to train, a huge amount of equipment to collect, bosses to fight, bases to build, quests to complete, and a lot of content sitting behind that first login. But more content does not actually make a game worth buying. So after everything that's been added and after everything that I've played, and of course hearing and seeing where Dragonwilds is heading, I want to ask a much simpler question. If you're thinking about buying Dragonwilds, what are you actually getting for your money? So let's start at the beginning. At its simplest, Dragonwilds is a survival adventure set in the RuneScape universe. You arrive in Ashenfall with very little and you gather resources, you craft equipment, you build somewhere to live, you explore, you fight, you complete quests, and you slowly uncover what has happened to this forgotten continent. But unlike a lot of survival games, there's a much stronger RPG structure underneath all of that. You have skills, equipment, abilities, quests, bosses, and you have an actual story taking you through the world. The more interesting question is if those systems actually work together. And that starts with the part of the game that's probably caused the most discussion since launch: combat. If you've watched Dragonwilds from the beginning, you'll know this has been one of the biggest areas of discussion. And Jagex knows it. The developers have said they went through thousands of survey responses, Steam reviews, Reddit discussions, and community feedback. And one word kept coming up: clunky. But since then, they have definitely addressed that, especially with the most recent updates and the updates to come. So if you're wondering what combat is actually like now, you've obviously got melee, ranged magic, you've got dodging, blocking, parrying, and all the different weapons can completely change how you approach a fight. The basic combat is fairly straightforward. You learn what an enemy does, you learn when to attack, when to move, and then you work out which attacks you can safely take. But where I think combat becomes a lot more interesting in this game is when the game starts asking you to combine those systems. So we're talking about a successful parry, a well-timed dodge, a weapon ability, switching equipment, using the right spell, managing stamina, and then you have the bosses. For me, this is where Dragonwilds is at its best from a combat perspective, because you have spent such a long time preparing for these fights. You've got equipment, food, supplies, you know exactly what you're gonna face, and then you've got to step into the arena and execute. And one of my favorite parts about this game is that the boss fights are much more memorable than simply running around killing the standard enemies. And that's important because I don't think that Dragonwilds needs to have the best combat system in the survival genre, but it does need combat that is enjoyable enough that you actually want to fight your way through the world. Plenty of survival games out there where you spend a lot of time avoiding combat because you're not strong enough or combat just doesn't feel good enough. I don't find myself doing that in this game. I'm willing to take it head on. And I think the current version of the game gets much closer to that than the game did when it first launched. The work on the most recent updates with the blocking, the stamina, the health, all of those things make it feel completely different to when players first stepped into Ashenfall in early access. And from my point of view, things do feel a lot more smoother now, and obviously I'm excited to see what they bring forward in future updates because, as I said, it's definitely still a work in progress. My only big criticism is that the regular enemies can still become quite predictable and tedious once you've figured them out. You generally know how to deal with them, and as much as we have raids and stuff like that, you still don't get caught off guard very often. You feel generally safe once you've upgraded to the tiers in that region. But when the game does throw something genuinely dangerous at you, especially a boss, combat becomes much more engaging. And for me, that makes it so much more fun, and again, as I said, so much more memorable. Not only have I seen most of these boss fights as a challenge, but also I've seen them as a memorable experience, and that goes such a long way. And then there's Ashenfall. This is probably the part of Dragonwilds that's the easiest to appreciate without knowing anything about RuneScape. The world is beautiful. You've got forests, mountains, caves, ruins, corrupted areas, underground locations, and eventually the desert. Each major region has its own atmosphere, its own enemies, its own resources, environmental hazards, and things to discover. The question that I actually care about is it fun to explore? And most of the time, yes, because Dragonwilds does a good job of giving you reasons to wonder. You might see a structure in the distance, you might find a cave, stumble across a vault, you might notice something that looks completely out of place, and you think, What's that? So you go and find out and you get that organic discovery, and that is the kind of exploration that I really enjoy. The game is not always telling you exactly where the interesting thing is. Sometimes you discover it because you were simply curious, and that is great. But there is a weakness here. Once you've completed an area, taken the resources, finished the quest and defeated the enemies, some places lose a lot of their purpose. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for Dragonwilds going forward, is making previous regions viable and somewhere that you live rather than you just tick off the boxes and go through. And of course, that's much easier said than done, and I am curious to see how the devs tackle this in the future. Now we need to talk about the obvious question. How much RuneScape is actually in Dragonwilds, because this is a RuneScape game, but it's very clearly its own thing. You've got familiar creatures, Black Knights, Zogres, dragons, etc. You've got some very familiar skills. You've got equipment that RuneScape players will immediately recognize, the Abyssal Whip, the Staff of Light, etc. But then you also have completely new characters, regions, enemies, and systems built specifically for Dragonwilds. Obviously, the developers want this to feel true to RuneScape while still standing on its own as a survival game, and I do think that that balance is important, because if Dragonwilds was simply trying to recreate RuneScape, I just don't think it would work. Instead, it takes familiar pieces of RuneScape, puts them into a completely different type of game. You can hear it in the music, you can see it in the equipment, you can feel it in the skills, and then you look around and realize you're not in Galeno, you're in Ashenfall. And I think that's where Dragonwilds gets the balance right. It feels recognizably RuneScape without simply being old school or RS3 with a different camera. And then if we go and take the RuneScape layer away and Dragonwilds still has to work as a survival game, this is where I think the game makes some interesting choices. You need food, you need resources, you need equipment, and you need to prepare before going somewhere dangerous. But the survival is not constantly screaming for your attention. The systems are mostly there just to make your decisions matter. Do you have enough food? Do you have enough space? Do you have the right equipment? Should you make the trip now or come back later? Those kind of things. That's what the game introduces. But there are a few other things, such as the environmental hazards. Umbral Sands and Fellhollow are great examples of this. So that means that suddenly simply walking through an area requires just a little bit more thought. And in my opinion, that's where survival works the best, when it changes how you approach the world and how you approach each region, rather than just simply adding another meter that needs filling up, right? And the danger with that is that survival mechanics can really easily just become chores, and there's moments where Dragonwilds gets close to that line, but overall, I think these survival systems do a really good job of supporting the adventure. They make the preparation matter without becoming the entire game. And then we've got building, which is one area I really need to be completely honest about in my own experience. I'm not someone who spent like hundreds of hours designing enormous castles in Dragonwilds. Most of my bases have been functional. You know, crafting stations, storage, basic decoration, and just somewhere to come back to. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm an expert builder, but what I can tell you is that the building system has considerably more potential than what I've personally done with it. Because if you do look through the Dragonwilds community, you'll find some absolutely ridiculous creations. People have built huge houses, castles, taverns, somebody even recreated the Lumbridge Castle. And people are out there building entire compounds. And that's really useful for this part because it tells you the ceiling of the system, rather than just like what I've done with it. Jagex has continued adding building pieces and decorations, and they will definitely continue this because they know how important it is for the community. But is it a reason to buy Dragonwilds? For me, absolutely not, because it's not the way that I play, but it's a very good supporting system. It gives you somewhere to live, somewhere to work on, and if you're creative, there's clearly a lot more depth here than I've personally explored. I think the people who are going to get the most out of building are the people who already enjoy those building style games, and for everyone else, it's still actually quite a useful part of the experience. And then there's the actual adventure, because Dragonwilds could have just been a survival sandbox, but it's not. There's characters, quests, lore, major storylines, and there's bosses that sit at the end of those journeys. And this is another area where the game has grown considerably. We added Dowdun Reach, Fellhollow, Umbral Sands, all after that initial Velgar fight. And of course, the main story is now building towards Cauldra. The interesting question in this segment is whether or not the quests themselves are actually good, or whether they're simply a way of sending you around the map. And I really think the answer is somewhere in between. Some quests are pretty good and have that classic RuneScape humor. Some characters are pretty entertaining as well. And then there's other moments where the quest exists just to get you to that next objective. But yeah, I do like having them. Side quests, they give the world some personality. They give you a reason to care about the places you're visiting. And they make the bosses feel like a part of an actual adventure rather than just an enemy sitting at the top of a tower or at the end of a dungeon. So now we can finally talk about value, because this is where all of those individual pieces actually come together. Like, what are you getting when you buy Dragonwilds? You're getting a full survival adventure, a large world, 12 skills with more to come, quests, bosses, combat, building, crafting, exploration, and co-op. You're also getting everything that's been added throughout early access. You're getting Fellhollow, Dowdun Reach, Umbral Sands, and then the Scorned Wilderness raid, which is coming at the full launch. And if you're wondering how long that is going to last you, that really just depends enormously on how you play. If you're the sort of person, which most RuneScape players are, that wants to level everything, collect everything, build everything, chase every piece of equipment, you can spend a very long time here. And if you simply just want to play through the main adventure, your experience is going to be a little bit different. But either way, I think both of those points are important, because you just shouldn't buy any game because someone tells you that this is a 50-hour game or this is a 100-hour game. You should buy it because you actually like what you're going to be doing during those hours. And that brings us to the real question. So is RuneScape Dragonwilds worth buying? If you're a RuneScape player that's already wanted a more traditional adventure built around RuneScape skills, creatures, and world, I think there is a lot here for you. If you're a survival game player who wants more structure, quests, and RPG systems, Dragonwilds is a very interesting option. If you love exploration, there's a beautiful world here for you to discover. If you love building, there is clearly much more depth than I have personally used. And if you want to play with friends, co-op is there. Crossplay makes that considerably more appealing as well. But as I've mentioned throughout the video, in each of these individual areas, there is no real best in class performance from Dragonwilds. But as an all-round product, I think there's a lot of positives that do outweigh the negatives. And obviously, it's not a game that everybody's going to love, and it's not a game that's going to last forever as well. And honestly, I think that's fine, because after hundreds of hours, there's only one thing that I know for certain. I kept coming back. And that probably tells you more about Dragonwilds than anything that I could have said in this video. I mean, I've spent hundreds of hours on this game, and I've killed bosses, I've traveled around, trained the skills, built some awful bases, and I've played through every update, and this stopped becoming a game that I was just making content on, and it became more of a game that I actually wanted to come back to. And I've already made some incredible gaming memories, like seeing Velgar for the first time at the Blue Keep was both terrifying and stunning at the same time. That is going to stick with me for a while, and that was the first real sort of wow moment in this game, and there's plenty more as well. And if you came to me and you asked me, knowing that everything that you know about Dragonwilds, would you buy this game again? I would. And not because it's perfect, not because it's old school RuneScape, not because it's RuneScape 3, not because it's the best survival game ever created, but I would buy it because it balances those things so well. And there's something incredibly satisfying about having your own world, a character, goals, just deciding what you want to do with them. Sometimes that's a boss, sometimes it's a new piece of equipment, sometimes it's exploring somewhere you've never even been, sometimes it's building a awful base, sometimes it's just logging in and seeing where it takes you. And that is what Dragonwilds has been for me. And if that sounds like something that you could get along with, then absolutely, this is the game for you. So the verdict is, do you think this game is worth buying? Absolutely. And if you think the same thing after watching this video, then I'll see you in Ashenfall.